They laughed at the dog. That was their first mistake. A convoy of heavy equipment trucks, worth more than most people earn in a lifetime, rolled down Copper Line Trail on a Tuesday morning in early April. The fog hadn't lifted yet over Ironbed Valley, the kind of fog that sits low and quiet, the kind that's been there longer than any road, longer than any company, longer than any permit stamped in an office 200 miles away. Harlan Dodd was already awake. He was always already awake. 75 years old, weathered the way fence posts get weathered, not broken, just hardened by everything the sky had thrown at him. He stood at the edge of his property line, one boot on the lowest rail of the fence, a cup of coffee going cold in his right hand. He didn't wave. He didn't move. He just watched the trucks come down the hill the way a man watches a storm roll in, not with fear, but with the quiet recognition of someone who has seen this before. Biscuit sat beside him. The old yellow Labrador was 12 years old, gray around the muzzle, slow in the mornings, the way old dogs get slow. She didn't chase rabbits anymore. She didn't bark at the wind. In 12 years, Harlan had maybe heard her bark 24 times, and every single time it meant something. The lead truck was a flatbed Kenworth, loaded with drilling equipment, GPS survey gear, laptops, and waterproof cases. Behind it, 2 more trucks. Behind those, a white crew cab with the Meridian Construction Group logo on the door, a clean geometric symbol that looked like it had been designed by someone who had never once touched real dirt. Biscuit's ears went flat. Then she moved. Not slowly, not like an old dog. She moved the way she moved when something was wrong, low to the ground, deliberate, cutting straight across the yard and out through the gap in the fence before Harlan could say a word. She ran to the middle of Copper Line Trail and stopped, planted all 4 paws, and she barked. Not a warning bark, not a curious bark, the kind of bark that comes from somewhere deeper than training. The lead truck slowed, then stopped. Then the white crew cab pulled up alongside it and the window rolled down. Derek Holt was 34 years old, a senior field engineer for Meridian's Mountain West Division. He had a project management certification, a company credit card, and the particular confidence of a man who had never once been wrong in front of people who couldn't afford to tell him he was wrong. He looked at Biscuit. He looked at Harlan. He smiled. The way people smile when they're about to say something they think is clever. "Hey, old-timer, you want to get your dog out of the road?" Harlan didn't move from the fence rail. "She doesn't usually do this," he said, quietly, not as an excuse, as information. Marcus Cale stepped out of the crew cab, project manager, pressed shirt, boots that had never seen mud. He looked at his watch. He looked at the dog. He looked at the schedule on his tablet. "Sir, we're on a tight window here. We've got permits." And a high-resolution LiDAR scan from our satellite team cleared this entire corridor 2 weeks ago. "With respect, your dog is not a subsurface sensor." A few of the crew laughed. Derek Holt opened his door, stepped down onto the running board, and clapped his hands twice at Biscuit, sharp, dismissive, the way you'd shoo a pigeon. "Come on, go home." Biscuit didn't move. Derek picked up an empty water bottle from the floor of the cab and tossed it toward her. It bounced in the dirt 2 feet away. Biscuit flinched, then stood her ground. Harlan set down his coffee cup on the fence post. He walked across the yard. He walked slowly, not because he was old, but because he was the kind of man who had stopped rushing somewhere around 1987 and never found a reason to start again. He crossed to Biscuit, bent down, knees cracking, and put his hand on her side. He could feel her trembling, not from fear, from whatever it was that she knew, and they didn't. He looked down the road. Then he looked at Derek Holt. "Your call," Harlan said. Just 2 words. No anger, no warning. Just the flat, hard truth of a man who knew what was coming. He took Biscuit by the collar and walked her to the grass on the far side of the fence. He sat down on an old stump. Biscuit pressed her body against his leg, staring down the road, waiting for the earth to speak. Harlan picked up his cold coffee and drank it anyway. The convoy moved forward. Before we go any further, if you've ever felt like the people with the biggest trucks and the loudest voices were the ones least worth listening to, you're in the right place. Hit that subscribe button right now, because the stories on this channel are about the ones who stay quiet and why you should never ever mistake their silence for weakness. The trucks moved 80 meters down Copperline Trail. Not 100, not 50, 80 meters. The exact distance between Harlan's fence post and the lowest point of the old creek drainage that ran beneath the road. The point where, in 1948, a geological survey team from the state of Montana had marked a small red X on a map and written 3 words in the margin. Subsurface void. Unstable. Nobody in that convoy had seen that map. The lead Kenworth hit the soft spot at 6:22 in the morning. There was no dramatic warning, no cracking sound like in the movies, just a faint sigh, the way ground sounds when it gives up, and then the front axle dropped 6 inches. The driver hit the brakes. The brakes did nothing useful. The weight of the load shifted forward, and the front of the truck went down like a slow curtain call, the nose tilting into the earth, the rear wheels lifting slightly off the road surface. Then the ground opened properly. The sinkhole, fed by decades of snowmelt from the Dunmore high country, carved hollow by the same underground creek that Harlan's grandfather had warned about in 1961, that Harlan himself had reported to the Montana Department of Natural Resources in 2017 in a 2-page letter that was acknowledged, filed, and never acted upon, swallowed the front third of the Kenworth in 11 seconds. The sound was extraordinary. Metal under compression. Hydraulic lines bursting. The low groan of a 50,000-pound machine being pulled somewhere it was never designed to go. Mud the color of old rust surged up around the cab doors. The headlights flickered twice, then went dark. The Meridian Construction Group logo on the door panel slid below the surface like a slow goodbye. Derek Holt stood outside his crew cab and stared. Marcus Cale was already on his phone. They called the county emergency line. They called Meridian's Regional Operations Center. They called a heavy recovery contractor out of Billings who quoted them 4 hours minimum and a price that made Marcus Cale's jaw tighten. The recovery contractor asked one question before he quoted the price. "What's the ground like around the vehicle?" Marcus looked at the mud still moving, still breathing, still pulling. "Soft," he said. "Then I'm not sending my rig into that until someone tells me what's underneath," the contractor said. "You pull wrong on a sinkhole. You lose the recovery truck, too." Marcus hung up. The second and third trucks had stopped 50 meters back. Their drivers stood on the road in the early morning light, hands in pockets, not speaking. A thermal flask got passed around. Nobody looked at Derek Holt. Derek Holt looked back down the road. 80 meters away across the fence line, an old man sat on a stump in the pale Montana morning. A yellow dog pressed against his leg. Neither of them had moved. Derek Holt stood there for a long time. The mud kept moving. Biscuit kept watching. It takes a specific kind of man to walk 80 meters back down a road he just came down with 3 trucks and a full crew watching him. Derek Holt was not that kind of man, so he sent Marcus Cale first. Marcus buttoned his shirt collar, a useless gesture, the kind people make when they need a moment to reassemble themselves, and walked back down Copperline Trail alone. His boots, clean this morning, were already caked with the orange-gray mud of Iron Bed Valley. He walked slowly, not because the ground was uncertain, because he was. Harlan watched him come. Biscuit watched him come. Neither of them stood up. Marcus stopped at the fence line. He put one hand on the top rail, the universal gesture of a man who wants to seem casual and isn't pulling it off. He cleared his throat. "Mr. Dodd." Harlan looked at him, said nothing. "We've run into a situation down the road." Harlan picked up his coffee cup. Empty. He looked into it anyway. "We were wondering if you might have any equipment that could—" "How deep is she?" Marcus blinked. "Excuse me?" "The truck," Harlan said. "How deep is she sitting?" Marcus looked back over his shoulder. "Front axle is about maybe 4 feet below grade. Maybe more by now." Harlan nodded slowly, set the cup back down on the fence post. "She'll be 6 by noon," he said. "The ground's still cold underneath. It'll keep moving until the weight settles or something stops it." Marcus opened his mouth, closed it. "Then, do you have something that could pull her out?" Harlan didn't answer right away. He scratched behind Biscuit's ear. She leaned into his hand, still watching Marcus with the calm, unblinking attention of an animal that has already made up its mind about a person. Then Harlan stood up. His knees cracked. He didn't wince. He picked up the empty coffee cup, turned toward the house and said 2 words over his shoulder. "Come in." Marcus Cale followed him through the gate, across the yard, up the 2 porch steps. Derek Holt, still standing by the crew cab 80 meters away, watched them disappear through the front door. He waited 30 seconds. Then he started walking too. Inside, the house was what it was: worn floorboards, a wood stove with a crack in the fire brick, a kitchen table with 3 chairs and only one that got used. A framed photograph on the wall, a younger Harlan in army fatigues, somewhere cold, somewhere far from Montana, standing beside a piece of machinery the size of a small building. Marcus noticed the photograph. He didn't say anything about it. Harlan filled the kettle and put it on the stove. He didn't offer anything else. He didn't explain anything. He simply moved around his kitchen the way a man moves in a space he has owned for 50 years, without hesitation, without performance, without any awareness that he was supposed to be making his guests comfortable. Derek Holt knocked on the open door. Harlan glanced at him once. Then he walked to the back of the house without a word. They heard the squeak of a heavy door, the kind of door that hasn't been opened in a while but opens smoothly anyway, because the man who owns it keeps the hinges oiled. Then they heard something else, the sound of a tarp being pulled back. The barn sat 30 feet behind the house. It was older than the house, older than the fence, older than the road that Meridian Construction Group had just broken. The timber was black with decades of Montana winter. The roof had been patched in 3 places with different materials from 3 different eras: corrugated iron, cedar shake, and 1 section of aluminum sheeting that caught the morning light and threw it sideways across the yard. Harlan pushed the barn doors open, both of them, all the way. The light came in slow, the way light enters old spaces, cautiously, as if it wasn't sure it was welcome. Dust moved in the air. The smell was oil and cold metal and something older underneath, the smell of machines that have worked hard and been respected for it. In the center of the barn, under a canvas tarp the color of old moss, sat something large. Harlan took the corner of the tarp in both hands. He pulled. The canvas came off in one long motion, the way a magician reveals something, except there was nothing theatrical about the way Harlan did it. No flourish, no pause for effect. He folded the tarp over his arm, set it on a workbench, and stepped back. The Caterpillar D7 sat there like it had been waiting. It didn't have the plastic sensors or the complex emissions computers of the trucks outside. It was pure heavy steel and low-gear torque. Harlan had rebuilt the transmission himself back in '94, and the pony motor was kept in a state of constant readiness. While modern trucks relied on traction control that failed in deep mud, the D7 relied on raw mechanical advantage and the kind of weight that anchored itself into the bedrock. He hit the starter. The D7 woke up, not with a whine, but with a deep rhythmic thrum that shook the dust from the barn rafters. Harlan engaged the tracks, eased the machine forward out of the barn, and turned it toward Copperline Trail. Derek and Marcus followed on foot. They didn't speak. There was nothing to say. 23 minutes later, the Kenworth was out of the hole. Not dragged, pulled, steadily, without drama, the way the D7 did everything. Harlan had read the ground first, walking the perimeter of the sinkhole for 4 minutes with his hands in his pockets and his eyes on the mud, reading things on the surface that neither Derek nor Marcus could see. He had positioned the dozer at an angle, not straight back but offset 17 degrees, pulling the truck's frame rather than its axle, distributing the load across stable ground on the eastern edge of the sinkhole. Nobody told him to do it that way. He just knew. When the Kenworth's front wheels came back over solid ground, one of the younger crew members started to clap. He stopped after 2 claps. The silence from everyone else was too heavy for applause to survive in. Harlan shut the D7 down, climbed off, wiped his hands on a rag from his back pocket. Marcus Cale stepped forward, hand extended, the handshake of a man trying to close a chapter quickly. "Mr. Dodd, we can't thank you enough, truly. We'll make sure Meridian—" "Come inside," Harlan said. Marcus blinked. "I'm sorry?" "There's something you need to see." He walked back toward the house. Biscuit fell into step beside him. Marcus looked at Derek. Derek looked at the truck, now sitting on solid ground, mud dripping from its undercarriage. They followed Harlan inside. The kitchen table had 3 chairs. Harlan sat in the one he always sat in. He gestured without words at the other two. Derek and Marcus sat down. The kettle on the stove had been boiling for 20 minutes, and nobody had touched it. Harlan got up, poured 3 cups, and set them on the table. He didn't ask if they wanted coffee. In his house, coffee was not a question. Then he went to the back bedroom. They heard a drawer open. The specific sound of a drawer that sticks slightly, wood swollen from years of Montana humidity, and then the sound of papers. Not the rustling of recently handled documents. The deliberate, careful sound of a man retrieving something he has always known exactly where to find. He came back with a manila envelope, the color of an old bone. The flap is sealed not with glue, but with a length of kitchen twine wound twice around a small cardboard disc, the kind of closure that hasn't been manufactured since 1970. He set it on the table between them. He sat down. He drank his coffee. He didn't open the envelope. Marcus reached forward. "May I?" Harlan nodded once. Marcus unwound the twine, lifted the flap, and reached inside. The first document was a geological survey map. Dunmore County, Montana, dated September 1948. Hand-drafted on linen paper, the kind that doesn't yellow the same way ordinary paper does. It darkens, deepens, becomes something closer to parchment. The survey lines were drawn in India ink, precise and faded, and across the southwestern quadrant of the map, directly beneath the section of Copperline Trail where a Kenworth truck had spent the better part of the morning underground, was a notation in the original surveyor's handwriting. Subsurface karst formation, high collapse risk. No heavy vehicle access recommended. Marcus set it down carefully. The second document was a letter, Montana Department of Natural Resources and Conservation, dated March 14, 2017. The letterhead was official, the language was bureaucratic, and the substance was this. Harlan Dodd's formal report of unstable subsurface conditions along Copperline Trail had been received, logged, and referred to the appropriate department for review. There was no follow-up letter, because there had been no follow-up. The third document was older than either of the first two. A land agreement typed on a manual typewriter signed in 1974 by Harlan Dodd and the then chairman of Dunmore County Roads Commission. 2 pages. The relevant paragraph was on page 2, third clause, and someone, Harlan, presumably years ago, had drawn a single straight line in pencil beside it. Not a highlight, not an annotation, just a line. The kind you draw when you want to remember exactly where something is without making a fuss about it. The clause read, "The landowner retains permanent right of refusal over any commercial or industrial vehicle access crossing the designated buffer corridor. Any party found to have caused measurable damage to the buffer corridor through unauthorized or negligent transit shall be liable for remediation costs, consequential damages, and the landowner's reasonable legal expenses." Derek Holt read it twice. Then he read it a third time. His coffee sat untouched in front of him, going the same direction Harlan's had gone that morning, cold, and past the point where temperature mattered. Marcus Cale set the papers down on the table with the deliberate care of a man who is suddenly aware that every movement he makes is being observed and evaluated. He folded his hands. He looked at Harlan. "Mr. Dodd," he said, and his voice had changed. The project manager efficiency was gone, replaced by something more careful, more considered. How long have you had these?" "The map," Harlan said, "came from my father. He was on the survey crew in '48. Brought it home the day they finished. Said the county ought to have kept a copy somewhere they'd actually look at it." He paused. "Apparently they didn't." "And the agreement?" "I signed it myself. I was 32. The county wanted to widen this road. I told them they could widen it anywhere they liked except across the drainage line. They agreed. We put it in writing." He looked at Marcus steadily. "I generally put things in writing." A knock at the front door. Harlan stood up, crossed the room, and opened it. The man on the porch was in his 60s, wearing a canvas jacket and carrying a leather briefcase. He nodded at Harlan with the quiet familiarity of an old friend. "Ray," Harlan said. "Harlan," Ray Sutton replied. He stepped inside, glancing at Derek and Marcus with the sharp, professional eyes of a man who spent his life reading the fine print that others ignored. He set his briefcase on the kitchen counter and took out a legal pad. Marcus Cale looked at the briefcase, then at the lawyer, then back at Harlan. A realization hit him colder than the Montana morning. "You called him before we even got the truck out of the hole," Marcus said. His voice was thin. "You knew this was going to happen." "I called him 2 weeks ago," Harlan said, his voice flat and steady. "The day your survey crew came through here with their GPS poles and told me to stay behind my fence because the professionals were handling the maps. I tried to show them the 1948 survey then. They laughed, said they didn't need paper maps in the age of satellites." Harlan leaned back against the counter. "I figured right then that you wouldn't listen to a neighbor, and you clearly wouldn't listen to a dog. I knew the only thing people like you listen to is a man with a bar license and a court order." The room went silent. Only the sound of the wind against the eaves remained. Ray Sutton didn't waste time. He laid out the documents like he was placing chess pieces for a checkmate. He detailed the 1974 Buffer Corridor Agreement, the repeated negligence of ignoring the 2017 formal warning, and the specific liability clauses for the unauthorized transit of heavy equipment. Marcus Cale asked to make a phone call. He was outside on the porch for 11 minutes. Through the window they watched him pace. He looked small against the vast Montana sky. When he came back in, he didn't look like a project manager anymore. He looked like a man who had just been told by his corporate legal team that they were standing on a very expensive sinking ship. "What does Mr. Dodd need to make this right?" Marcus asked. Ray Sutton didn't even look up from his legal pad. He just started reading the numbers. Derek Holt looked out the window at the mud-caked Kenworth, and then at the cold coffee on the table. He finally understood. In this valley, the old ways hadn't just survived. They were the only things holding the ground together. The settlement was finalized 22 days later. The terms were confidential, as settlements tend to be. What was not confidential, because it was a matter of public record filed with Dunmore County, was the remediation order issued against Meridian Construction Group, requiring full restoration of the buffer corridor along Copper Line Trail to its pre-incident condition, to be completed within 90 days at the company's expense. The Meridian project in Ironbed Valley was suspended pending a new environmental and geological review. The review, under the terms negotiated by Ray Sutton, would be conducted by an independent firm, not Meridian's preferred contractor. The project did not resume that year. It did not resume the year after. Harlan Dodd used a portion of what he received to fix the fire brick in his wood stove. He had been meaning to do that for 3 winters. He bought 2 new hydraulic lines for the D7, though the old ones were still serviceable. He believed in maintaining things before they failed rather than after. He bought Biscuit a new dog bed, the orthopedic kind, recommended for older dogs with joint problems. She sniffed it twice and went back to sleeping on the floor beside the wood stove, in the spot she had worn smooth over 12 years. Harlan left the new bed there anyway. She used it sometimes when she thought he wasn't watching. On a Thursday morning in late May, 6 weeks after the morning on Copper Line Trail, Harlan sat on the porch with his coffee and watched the fog lift off Ironbed Valley the way it had lifted off that valley every morning for as long as he could remember. The road was empty. The sinkhole had been filled and graded by Meridian's crew the previous week, and the earth was raw and pale where the work had been done, but the grass at the edges was already beginning to come back. Biscuit lay on the porch boards beside his chair, her chin on her paws, watching the road with the patient attention of an animal that has learned that roads are worth watching. She wasn't trembling. She was just watching, the way she always did, the way she always would. Here's what most people get wrong about strength. They think it's loud. They think it's the biggest truck, the loudest voice, the most impressive equipment staged on the highway for everyone to see. But the people who have actually been through something, the ones who've stood in the cold and the mud and the silence and come out the other side, they know better. Strength is the man who already made the phone call before you arrived. Strength is the dog who stands in the road when everyone else is laughing. Strength is the paper in the drawer that's been waiting, patient and quiet, for the day it's needed. If that's the kind of story that matters to you, subscribe. Not because we're asking you to, because somewhere in you, you already know that the quiet ones are worth listening to, and you don't want to miss what they say next.